So let's move on to different ceremonies. So let's talk about the first ceremony, which is daily stand-up. And there can be multiple questions asked in this frame of reference. There can be questions like, what do you think is the most important ceremony that a Scrum Master is supposed to do? And you can, whatever is your favorite ceremony as a Scrum Master, you can answer that question. My personal favorite is a retrospective, because we as humans, we have to kind of look back how we did so far and analyze our progress and make sure we make improvements in our progress based on what we have done so far. And a retrospective is a perfect place which gives us that opportunity. Basically, in a retrospective, the team comes together and they analyze what went well and what did not go well and what we can do better in the next sprint to reach our sprint goal. So that is the responsibility of a Scrum Master, to facilitate that ceremony and to create that environment where the team feels comfortable to share those things. And generally, how a Scrum Master facilitates a retrospective is, during the beginning of the retrospective, there is an icebreaker which lets people loose, which creates a jolly environment where people are more comfortable. And once that is there, then we slowly migrate into what went well, what did not go well, what we could do better. There are different ways to do a retrospective, and I will show my way in the next part 2 of this video. But for now, if a question is asked, what's the favorite ceremony? For me, it's retrospective, and it's favorite because it gives us the opportunity to look back and improve on what we can do better in the next sprint. Now, how a Scrum Master facilitates all these ceremonies, and what is his role while these ceremonies are ongoing? During a daily stand-up, what a Scrum Master is responsible for doing is making sure that the team is present. And once the team is present, asking questions, 3 questions. What did we do yesterday? What are we working on today? And if there are any impediments you're facing to complete the work that is going on. So those are the things that a Scrum Master will do during a daily stand-up. Um, Generally, many teams, in my experience, have a tendency to go into refinement during the daily stand up, which is an anti practice, anti agile, anti scrum practice. As a scrum master, it is your job to keep the product owners, stakeholders, and all the team members on a track to answer just 3 questions. What did we do yesterday? What are we working on today? And what are the impediments you're facing? If the team is getting into refinement or too much details, which is very common across all teams in all types of work environments, it is your responsibility as a scrum master to make sure that the team doesn't get into too much detail. The details are after the ceremony is done, and this is a time bound ceremony. So let's write it here. What are we doing during this daily stand up? Number A, this is a time bound ceremony. 15 minutes is the general time, but depending on the team size, this is written in the guide, but this is not what it is legitimately supposed to be. If you have 20 people in your team, it's not possible to do it in within 15 minutes, so you need more time. So but generally, for scrum teams, for agile teams which are smaller in size, the daily stand up is 15 minutes. Okay. And this is a time bound ceremony. It's 15 minutes. The team answers 3 questions. Uh, Number 1, what did you do yesterday? What are we working on today? What impediments you are facing? So those are the 3 questions that will be answered during the daily stand-up. It's a time-bound ceremony. We are asking for 3 questions. What did we do yesterday? What are you working on today? And if there are any impediments that you are facing in completing the work that you are doing. Now, this is a very important ceremony for a Scrum Master because it generally sets the tone for the day of the Scrum Master. The day of the Scrum Master can be planned out from the daily stand-up. In the daily stand-up, when the team is saying what they worked on yesterday, that's where you have to keep track. Okay, is, let's say, person X, whose name is Seema, she's saying that she worked on building up the APIs yesterday. How is that progress going? how much are we done, those kind of things you are expecting as answer from the person. What did we do yesterday? Okay, what are we working on today? Are we working on the same thing? If the person has been working on the same thing for consecutive 4 or 5 days, and there are only the story is only worth 3 points or 2 points, then the scrum master asks the questions: what are the impediments you're facing? Why is it taking so much time? And those questions can be tailored. Now, I know the general response that is being pushed in the agile community, or being told in the agile community, is that you should only ask these questions and you should not get into too much detail. But as a scrum master, you have to be flexible, and that is the whole goal of being agile. You have to be flexible according to your team environment and according to your team whatever the team is working on. Based on that, you have to be flexible. So in my team, generally what happens is, okay, what did you do yesterday? Okay, I built the APIs yesterday. What are we working on today? I'm still building the APIs today. Okay, you have been doing this for this has been going on for 4 days, but the story only has 3 story points. Why is it taking so long? Are there any impediments, any dependencies you're facing? Yes, I'm facing dependency from, let's say, from the design team, or from this team, or from the product team. We need more clarity. Okay, so let's discuss this after the stand up. Let's put it in the parking lot. Let's discuss this after the stand up. And you will, right there, you will take down a note as a scrum master on the side. Dependency faced by person Seema. She's facing a dependency. Let's discuss this in depth after the stand up. After that, we will move on. Generally, the anti patterns that you need to look out for as a scrum master over here is, generally what will happen is, I did this yesterday, and then someone, let's say a product owner or someone, will interject. What about this? What about this? And then you have to stop that. You have to stop that. You have to keep the status going. If it's a general question, a short question, yes. If people start going in too much depth, you have to cut the people and keep moving on. You have to make sure that people stay in line, and they because it's a time bound ceremony. You cannot do refinement during a stand up, which is very common. So that is how you will conduct a daily stand up. We are asking 3 questions: what did you do yesterday? What are you working on today? What impediments you're facing? Now, once the daily stand up is very important from a scrum master, because once the dependencies come up, it is your job as a scrum master to make sure those dependencies are, first of all, they are mentioned in that story in Jira or in ClickUp, whatever tool you use, and we will go into depth in that in the part 2 of this video. They have to be mentioned. In ClickUp, we write comments. Okay, this is a dependency, and then we connect one story to the other story, whichever is dependency dependent on whichever. In Jira, you can connect 2 stories. If it's a dependency on the other story, you can do that. So as a scrum master, you have to do that. If it's dependent on some other story, then you have to connect the story to this story to keep track of these things, that this was dependent on that. And you have to mention in the comments, okay, this is what the progress is so far, this is what is going on. Some teams do that, some teams do not do that, but that is what you will do, right? And the second thing is, during after the stand up is done, you will also go into Jira to make sure, let's say, if a person Seema is saying, okay, she is done with her task, this task needs to be closed, this task will be closed today in the afternoon, and she's almost done, then it, as a scrum master, it is your responsibility to make sure that that task is closed, right? That task is closed during the afternoon. If that task lingers on for too late, then you have to ask the person, is this task closed? Is everything okay? What's the impediment you're facing? And that's how you structure your day as a scrum master. Okay, so this is the first thing that a scrum master does: a daily stand up in the day, right? Now, moving on to the next part, to the next ceremony. The next ceremony is sprint planning. Now, during a sprint planning, what we are doing is, what a scrum master does is, basically his job is to facilitate this ceremony. Now, what happens during a sprint planning is, during a sprint planning, the work that is assigned in the sprint from the product owner, that is given the highest priority from the backlog, that work is picked up and is assigned and put into the sprint. Let's say sprint is sprint 1, right? Let's say we are working on sprint 1. What happens before the sprint planning is, a product owner, what he will do is, he will assign the priority in the backlog to the work, to the stories that need to be pulled into the sprint. Based on that priority, those works, that those stories will be assigned story points, which will be assigned by the senior developers before it gets pulled into senior developers and the team before it gets pulled into the sprint, right? In the sprint planning, once that part has to be done before the sprint planning. in the sprint planning, you will pull that work into the sprint. In sprint one, all the work will be pulled that has been assigned story points by the developers in the team and that has been given priority by the product owner. That work will be pulled into the sprint. That is what happens during the sprint planning. As a scrum master, you will facilitate the ceremony when you will make sure it's your responsibility to move the to add the stories from one backlog board to the sprint. And when that addition is going on, you will ask, okay, you will make sure everybody verifies, product owner verifies, and the development team verifies that, okay, I'm pulling this microservice story from the backlog to this because this is the highest priority. Is that okay with you, PO? Is that okay with you, team? Okay, awesome. And this is assigned to Seema. Seema is working on this story. Is that okay with you, Seema? Yes. 3 story points. Yes. Okay. Perfect. You will make sure that all those facts are clear. And generally, what will happen 95% of the time is it will not be that smooth. When you are pulling, let's say, story XYZ, let's say story XYZ, um, let me mention here. So pre-sprint planning, PO will uh, prioritize the stories and story points will be assigned to each story by the team. This happens during the backlog refinement generally. So pre-sprint planning, PO will prioritize the stories to be pulled into the sprint and story points will be assigned to those stories. Now, once that is done, those things will be pulled into the sprint by the Scrum Master during the sprint planning. They have story points, they are prioritized. If they don't have proper story points, they are not being prioritized, you will basically, then it is a bigger problem because then you need to sit down with the PO and kind of work with them to make sure they understand that before sprint planning, these things need to be done. Now, during the sprint planning, if the team wants to go deeper and get more understanding about the story, let's say if a story is being assigned to, Prakash wants to work on XYZ story, then the team needs to sit down and the team during the sprint planning will work with the PO and Prakash and the development team to make sure that Prakash has a clear understanding of the story that is pulled into the sprint. Now, this is one part that is done pre-sprint planning. During the sprint planning, you will also do during the sprint planning, there is one more thing that needs to be done that is a responsibility of a scrum master. During the sprint planning, you will make sure that the stories that are being pulled into the sprint, they have a proper definition of done. There has to be complete clarity in the mind of the developer that is going to work on the story of what he needs to do and what needs to be done to make the story complete. There has to be complete clarity. There has to be a proper definition. There has to be a proper description with every story, what the story entails, what are the deliverables here. So as a scrum master, you will make sure during the sprint planning when you are pulling stories into the sprint, okay, this is very, very important because this will impact your velocity. This will impact the work that gets completed in the sprint. This will impact how smooth your daily stand-ups are, because if the clarity is not there, every stand-up will turn into a refinement session. The velocity will be impacted and team will just be jumbling and fighting with each other on understanding what needs to be done. There will be so much back and forth and so much waste of time. So this is very, 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 very important. During the sprint planning, a scrum master will make sure that there is a proper definition of done and proper deliverable and goals mentioned in the description of every story that is being pulled into the sprint. So, okay, pre-sprint planning, a scrum master will do this. PO will prioritize the stories. PO will make sure that the story points are assigned along with the development team to the stories that are being pulled into the sprint. But during the sprint planning, a Scrum Master, when he's pulling stories into the sprint, he will make sure that there is a proper definition of done. There is a proper acceptance criteria. There is proper deliverables that are being written along with the story that is being pulled into the sprint. Okay, now once that is done, that is what is a sprint planning. Now, once that is done, um, once that work is done, then during the end of the sprint planning, we will come up and we will redefine the sprint goal for the team so that everyone is aware. Okay, during this sprint, whatever is the sprint goal. During this sprint, we are planning to complete this feature and these stories, and we are planning to finish this stories, which will look like this in the product, and this is the most priority that will be given to the customer during the sprint, and these many stories, and this is the features, and this is how it will look like in the final product. Let's say we are building a story. Okay, we are going to build a search bar where people can enter the address. Let's say we are building a search bar where people can enter the address and search for their property in a real estate website. So that will be a story. We are building a search bar. This has to do in the sprint goal and acceptance criteria and definition of done. You will write, in this sprint, we are planning to build a search bar which will perform this function where you enter an address. It returns the address along with some suggestions with the proper address. You can click on that address and it will give you the result. We are planning to finish this feature finish this story in this sprint, and this will look like this. And when you are saying that, okay, we are delivering a search bar, make sure under that story there is a proper deliverable, what we are doing with that search bar, how will that search bar perform, what is the acceptance criteria, how will that search bar look like once it is done and completed. And yeah, you have to make sure that those things are clearly mentioned and the team is clear on what they need to do for this sprint, for this particular story, and for their sprint goal. So once that is done, we will say these many stories will be completed, these many story points will be completed during this sprint, and we reiterate that to the team. That is what happens on a short general basis in a sprint planning. We will get into more depth in all these ceremonies during the part 2 of this video. Now, this is what a Scrum Master does during a daily stand-up and a sprint planning. Now, moving on to the third ceremony, which is backlog refinement. What does a Scrum Master do during backlog refinement? Now, backlog refinement is generally done. In some teams, it is done twice a week, while in some teams, it is done once a week. So it really just depends. Okay, so some teams, they will do backlog refinement even 2 or 3 times a week based on how their work is, how their structure is. Let's discuss what happens during a backlog refinement meeting. So as I said, and backlog refinement can be done twice a week, uh, twice bi-weekly. Depends really on the team structure and the team backlog, how mature the backlog is, how big the team is, how big the backlog is. Based on those, how volatile the backlog is, basically are the stake is the team working in such an environment where backlog is continuously coming in and new work is coming in, and there needs to be a continuous refinement. Based on that, it's generally done. So what happens during a backlog refinement is the team will sit down with the product owner. You are the facilitator, so you will bring the team together, you'll bring the product owner together, they will sit down, they will go through the backlog, and when they are going through the backlog, they are making sure that there is proper refinement being done of every work item in the backlog, of every story in the backlog. Let's say um, before a backlog refinement, the board will look like uh, unclear stories with unclear written items, what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done. After the backlog refinement, the story will be properly completed with a proper definition of done, proper acceptance criteria, a proper story points assigned. In some backlog refinements, story points will also be assigned. So yeah, after the backlog refinement, that's what you will have: a properly refined backlog board, which will contain properly refined stories with proper acceptance criteria, proper definition of done, proper story points assigned. That is what happens during a backlog refinement. It is run by a product owner. You facilitate the ceremony. The product owner runs the ceremony and goes through the backlog board and works with the development team to make sure there is clarity on what needs to be done. Uh, Prioritized. Some product owners even prioritize things before or after the backlog refinement session. You, as a Scrum Master, basically what you are doing during a backlog refinement is communicating with the team, communicating with the team of what stories will be refined during this backlog refinement and what topics will be discussed and clarified during this backlog refinement. And you have to communicate this with the team before the backlog refinement session. You have to sit down with the product owner, understand what in the backlog board needs to be refined during this backlog refinement. And once the product owner gives you those items, you will then communicate that with the development team, make sure the development team knows this is what we are going to discuss, this is what we are going to refine during this backlog refinement, and make sure you facilitate that. You invite all the right people that need to be there, whether some people from design need to be there, the testing people need to be there, this and that. You have to make sure that all the people that need to be there, they're invited properly and they are clear on what needs to be discussed, what are the expectations, and so that the team can do their homework before they come into the backlog refinement. They are aware of, okay, this is what needs to be discussed, and this is what I might have to present, and this is what I might have to say, and this is where I might have to give my input. So that is your responsibility as a Scrum Master to make sure that you facilitate a perfect backlog refinement where there is no ifs and buts. There is proper refinement session going on of all the stories that need to be refined in the backlog. That is what happens during a backlog refinement, and the product owner will run the ceremony. You will facilitate the ceremony. Now, the fourth ceremony that a Scrum Master conducts is a sprint demo. Now, what happens during a sprint demo is uh, once a sprint is completed and you have finished certain stories within the sprint. For the reference of this video, this tutorial, we are going to say a search bar has been completed within this sprint. We have created a search bar where people can go and they can write an address and they can search for that address. So once that story is completed within the sprint, after the sprint is completed, you will sit down with the stakeholders and people like senior product officer. In multiple teams it's multiple, in enterprise teams it's different, in every team it's different, right? You will sit down with the development team, product owner, chief product officer, chief technology officer, whatever way the stakeholders work in your environment. The stakeholders, whether it is HR department, let's say you are building something for the HR department, or let's say you're building something like a search bar, right? Search bar, you're building something for someone who will use the search bar on a regular basis. You will sit down with those people, and those people will you will present what you built during the sprint. And once you are presenting that what you built during the sprint to those people, they will critique it, they will analyze it, they will tell you, okay, this is right, this is wrong, should be this way, this should be this way. Generally, with the stakeholders, what I like to do is I have a common chat with the stakeholders, with the chief product officer who is our stakeholder. We have a common chat, and in the chat, the development team, the product owners, they communicate back and forth with each other, and the stakeholders can generally read and see what is going on and what the challenges they are facing. And if they have time to interject, they can interject before we build something that is wrong. So in this, that is what happens in my case currently, but it's different for every team. In a sprint demo, you will sit down with the development, you will facilitate, as a Scrum Master, you will facilitate the ceremony. The product owner, the development team will sit down with the chief product officer, the customer who is going to use the product, and they will showcase what they did. And you will generally get critiques, or you will get a good job, or whatever the feedback you will get. Based on that feedback, you will either make improvements to your release, or you will, if you get a good job, then you will move on to the next story in the next sprint, and the cycle goes on. So that is generally what happens in a sprint demo. And you, as a Scrum Master, you will facilitate the ceremony, make sure that right people are there who need to be there, the chief product officer, or whoever is the stakeholder, the customer who's going to use the product, those people are there. Make sure their feedback that they're giving is registered, whatever the feedback they're giving, and make sure that the meeting stays on track. Generally, very rarely, sometimes people sometimes go back and forth, and we get off track and we get into personal attacks and things like that. If those kind of things happen, those are anti-patterns, and a scrum master, as a scrum master, as a facilitator, you have to make sure that the team stays on track, that the stakeholders, everyone, the feedback is proper, the feedback is good, and the feedback is registered, and everyone stays on track. So that is your responsibility as a scrum master in case of a sprint demo. Now we will mention that here. As a scrum master, I will facilitate the sprint demo ceremony and make sure that the right stakeholders slash users slash customers are present in the sprint demo, and I will make sure that the proper information is presented in front of these people, and I will also make sure that their feedback, whether good or bad or improvements, is properly registered and documented for later reference and improvements in the product. I am also responsible as a Scrum Master for making sure that the ceremony stays on track, and it is properly run and conducted. So again, to reiterate, during a sprint demo, you as a Scrum Master, you will invite the right stakeholders, the user, the customer, make sure the ceremony stays on track, nobody gets off track, make sure the feedback that the customer gives for the product during the sprint demo that is being presented, the feedback is registered for later documentation and later improvements. And that is just the gist of a sprint demo. We will go more deeper into sprint demo, how it's done and what happens into the next part 2 of this video. But for now, this is what a sprint demo looks like, and this is what you as a Scrum Master is responsible for. Now, moving on to the last and the most important ceremony, which is the sprint retrospective. In the part 2 of this video, I will create a mural board. I use Mural for retro. You can also use Miro, or you can also use Easy Retro. There are many other boards that you can use for your sprint retrospectives. I use Mural board, and I will show a sample mural board of what a sprint retrospective, if you are a new Scrum Master, you can use that pattern, and you can use that board in your team when you go in. So basically, what in the sprint retrospective, the main gist of this, the main base of this ceremony is basically, in this previous sprint, what could we have done better? If we were to do this sprint again, what would we do different? What could we have done better? What do you think are the mistakes we made in this previous sprint? That is what you are going to discuss during the sprint retro. So we are answering during the sprint retro 4 questions. What did we do better? Now, what did we like about the previous sprint? Or let's just say, what did we like? Because it's not necessarily the previous sprint. People might like the process in general, which is not related to previous sprint. If we say previous sprint, just centralizes and focuses it too much. But let's keep it broad, because it's in your benefit as a Scrum Master, because then you can get more broad feedback, maybe even about your process as a Scrum Master, how you can improve the process. So Let's not focus on the sprint. Let's keep it broad for your own benefit as a Scrum Master. What did we like? What did we not like? What can we do better? And then the fourth, so generally this is like a quadrant. So you will have one quadrant here, one quadrant here, one quadrant here, one quadrant here, and between there will be a line. So what did we like? What did we not like? What can we do better? And what are the suggestions and accountable? What are the solutions and people accountable for those solutions? So this is how a retrospective will run, and this is a very important question. You will be asked this question in the interviews 100%. Every interview that I have done for a Scrum Master role, I have been asked about the retrospective. So what did we like in the retrospective? Let's say someone says, oh, I really like that we had a proper backlog refinement meeting, we had a proper sprint planning meeting, we had a proper sprint demo where the feedback was properly registered. Okay, great. What did we not like about our sprint? We did not like that we did not have a proper definition of done attached to some of the stories, and we have a lot of technical debt and this and that, whatever solution you come up with, right? Let's say we did not have a proper definition of done with the story. Okay, what can we do better? We can have a proper definition of done, a proper acceptance criteria with every story we pull into the sprint. Okay, that shows a weakness in our backlog refinement, that shows a weakness in our sprint planning. Okay, now, what are the solutions and the people accountable for those solutions? The solution is that we need to have a proper acceptance criteria. We need to have a proper definition of done with every story that we pull into the sprint. And the people accountable for those solutions are Scrum Master, Product Owner, and the development team. These are the people that need to make sure that this solution gets implemented so that there is less vagueness about what we are going to do. There is more clarity on what needs to be done in the sprint, and we improve our velocity that way. We improve the back and forth that the team happens during the sprint planning or during the daily stand-up, that gets reduced to minimal, and the work gets done faster. So that is what a sprint retrospective will entail. And once you are holding people accountable, the people that are responsible for this, you as a Scrum Master, it is your responsibility during the next sprint to make sure that the people that are accountable, they are doing their job properly, and you as a Scrum Master will make sure that you have to ensure that the work that was promised in the retrospective, the action item that was promised, is getting properly completed. Okay, so those are the things that a Scrum Master is responsible for. Now we will do a quick summary of what we discussed so far in this video. Okay, what are the roles and responsibilities of a Scrum Master? The Scrum Master is responsible for facilitating all Scrum ceremonies like daily stand-up, sprint planning, backlog refinement, sprint demo, and sprint retrospective. Along with facilitating all these different ceremonies, the Scrum Master is also responsible for managing and removing dependencies between multiple teams, tracking those dependencies in Jira, making sure they are visible, maintaining transparency between the team and the stakeholders, conflict resolution between team members, capacity management, tracking velocity, how much work is getting done in each sprint, and comparing with previous sprint, and why our velocity is not increasing, doing the diagnosis and making sure that those diagnosis topics are discussed in the retrospective, sprint burn down charts, and sprint reports, creating sprint reports for the stakeholders, for the management, and whatnot. So those are the things the Scrum Master is responsible for. Now, during the different ceremonies that we discussed during daily stand-up, a Scrum Master is going to ask 3 questions. What did we do yesterday? What are we working on today? What impediments are you facing? During the sprint planning, we will make sure that all the stories that are being pulled into the sprint have story points assigned to it, and they have been prioritized by the product owner. Once they are pulled into the sprint, you have to make sure that there is a proper definition of done, proper acceptance criteria with every story that is pulled into the sprint. Post sprint planning, or towards the end of the sprint planning, you will reiterate and redefine the sprint goal of every sprint. The backlog refinement, where every item in the backlog will be refined, given proper acceptance criteria, proper prioritization. You will be given proper refinement session where it will be clear. If it's vague, there will be more clarity on what needs to be done. Right? Product owner runs it, Scrum Master facilitates it. Sprint demo, where you will sit down with the stakeholders, make sure the right people are present in the meeting, whether stakeholders, users, customers, and the development team and the product owner will present what they have achieved in the sprint so far to the stakeholders, and you as a Scrum Master will collect their feedback and make sure that feedback is registered and documented, and make sure that feedback is communicated with the team, and make sure the meeting stays on track. That is what you will do during the sprint demo. And the sprint retro, which is the very important meeting. What did we do yesterday? What did we not like about this sprint? What did we like? What can we do better? And if we are suggesting some solutions, who are the person accountable for those solutions? And make sure you as a Scrum Master, during the sprint, you hold the people accountable and make sure those solutions get implemented. That is what a Scrum Master does. Okay, those are the roles and responsibilities of a Scrum Master. Now there is a part 2 of this video coming very soon, which will go deeper into all the ceremonies. Please like and subscribe the video. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And also, if you want a one-on-one consultation, you're looking for a Scrum Master job, you're having trouble, or you want to understand, become better at your job as a Scrum Master, and you want to have a one-on-one consultation with me, go click on the link down below and get a one-on-one consultation with me. I will guide you. If you're looking for a job, I'll guide you how to get a job from without no experience, without anything. I'll guide you how to get a job. I'll guide you how to write a resume. I'll guide you how to apply, how to conduct the interview. Once you get the job, I'll also guide you on how to do your job better if you are looking for that guidance as well. Click on the link down below, get a consultation with me, and let me help you. That is it for this video, guys. Look out for part 2, where we'll go deeper into every ceremony, and we will go deeper into every topic that is written on this page, whether it is velocity chart, sprint burn down chart, sprint reports. We will go deeper into that, and we will make sure that that is completely clear for everyone watching this video. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful one.